Hello, good morning. Welcome to 11s with Fran. Thank you so much for joining this morning. Today I'm going to read a short story written in 1942 by Macaulay. It's called Miss Anstruther's Letters, and just to warn you, it's full of drama and desperately sad. Lots of the short stories I've done have been pretty low key and everyday, but this short story, Miss Anstruther's Letters, is a lot happens. It's only 9 pages, a lot happens, and it really puts you through the ringer emotionally. Macaulay wrote it. The story is semi-autobiographical, and Macaulay wrote it the year after something similar had happened to her. It's set 79 years ago today, during World War II, and I'm afraid it's desperately sad. But you know, sometimes that's what one wants. A good cry. And it's only 9 pages. Honestly, she fits so much into 9 pages. I'm glad to hear that I have been converting some of you to short stories. You can fit so much in 9 pages, it makes you wonder why we even bother with novels. I mean, not really, but you know what I mean. Okay, so settle in. Have you made yourself a cup of tea in preparation? I do hope so. And maybe a piece of cake. Have a little shuffle in your seat and get comfortable, and thank you all so much for joining. Lovely to have you. Let's begin. Miss Anstruther's Letters, written by Macaulay in 1942. Miss Anstruther, whose life had been cut in two on the night of May the 10th, 1941, so that now she felt herself a ghost, without attachments or habitation, neither of which she any longer desired, sat alone in the bed-sitting room she had taken, a small room littered with the grimy, broken and useless objects which she had salvaged from the burnt-out ruin round the corner. It was one of the many burnt-out ruins of that wild night, when high explosives and incendiaries had rained on London and the water had run short. It was now a gaunt and roofless tomb, a pile of ashes and rubble and burnt, smashed beams. Where the floors of 12 flats had been, there was now empty space. Miss Anstruther had for the first few days climbed up to what had been her flat, on what had been the 3rd floor, storming up fragments of beams and broken girders, searching and scrabbling among ashes and rubble, but not finding what she sought. Only here a pot, there a pan, sheltered from destruction by an overhanging slant of ceiling. Her marmalade for May had been there, and a little sugar and tea. The demolition men got the sugar and tea, but did not care for marmalade, so Miss Anstruther got that. She did not know what else went into those bulging dungaree pockets, and did not really care, for she knew it would not be the thing she sought, for which even demolition men would have no use. The flames, which take anything, useless or not, had taken them and destroyed them like a ravaging mouse or an idiot child. After a few days, the police had stopped Miss Anstruther from climbing up to her flat anymore, since the building was scheduled as dangerous. She didn't much mind. She knew by then that what she looked for was gone for good. It was not among the mass debris on the basement floor, where piles of burnt, soaked and blackened fragments had fallen through 4 floors to lie in indistinguishable anonymity together. The tenant of the basement flat spent her days there, sorting and burrowing among the chaotic mass that had invaded her home from the dwellings of her co-tenants above. There were masses of paper, charred and black and damp, which had been books. Sometimes the basement tenant would call out to Miss Anstruther, "Here's a book, that'll be yours, Miss Anstruther," for it was believed in Mortimer House that most of the books contained in it were Miss Anstruther's, Miss Anstruther being something of a bookworm. But none of the books were any use now, merely drifts of burnt pages. Most of the pages were loose and scattered about the rubbish heaps. Miss Anstruther picked up one here and there and made out some words. Yes, she would agree. Yes, that was one of mine. The basement tenant, digging bravely away for her motoring trophies, said, "Is it one you wrote?" "Oh, I don't think so," said Miss Anstruther. "I don't think I can have..." She did not really know what she might not have written in that burnt-out past when she had sat and written this and that on the 3rd floor, looking out on the green gardens. "Have you lost all your own?" the basement tenant asked. thinking about her motoring cups and how she must get at them before the demolition men did, for they were made of silver. Everything, Miss Anstruther answered. Everything. They don't matter. I hope you had no precious manuscripts, said the kind tenant, books you were writing in that. Yes, said Miss Anstruther, digging about among the rubble heaps. Oh yes, they're gone, but they don't matter. She went on digging till twilight came. She was grimed from head to foot. Her only clothes were ruined. She stood knee-deep in drifts of burnt rubbish that had been carpets, beds, curtains, furniture, pictures and books. The smoke that smouldered up from them made her cry and cough. What she looked for was not there. It was ashes, it was no more. She had not rescued it while she could. She had forgotten it, and now it was all ashes. All but one torn, burnt corner of notepaper, which she picked up out of a battered saucepan belonging to the basement tenant. It was niggled over with close small writing, the only words left of the thousands of words in that hand that she looked for. She put it in her note case and went on searching till dark. Then she went back to her bed sitting room, which she filled each night with dirt and sorrow and a few blackened cups. She knew at last that it was no use to look any more, so she went to bed and lay open-eyed through the short summer nights. She hoped each night that there would be another raid, which would save her the trouble of going on living. But it seemed that the Luftwaffe had, for the moment, done. Each morning came, the day broke, and like a revenant, Miss Anstruther still haunted her ruins, when now the demolition men were at work, digging and sorting and pocketing as they worked. I watch 'em close, said a policeman standing by. I always hope I'll catch 'em at it, but they sneak into dark corners and stuff their pockets before you can look around. Oh, they didn't ought, said the widow of the publican who had kept the little smashed pub on the corner. They didn't ought to let 'em have those big pockets. It's not right. Poor people like us, who've lost all we've had, to have what's left taken off by them. It's not right. The policeman agreed that it was not right, but they were that crafty he couldn't catch them at it. Each night, as Miss Anstruther lay awake in her strange, littered, unhomely room, she lived again the blazing night that had cut her life in two. It had begun like other nights, with the wailing siren followed by the crashing guns, the rushing hiss of incendiaries over London, and the whining, howling pitching of bombs out of the sky onto the firelit city. A wild, blazing hell of a night. Miss Anstruther, whom bombs made restless, had gone down once or twice to the street door to look at the glowing furnace of London and exchange comments with the caretaker on the ground floor and with the two basement tenants. Then she had sat on the stairs, listening to the demon noise. Crashes shook Mortimer House, which was tall and slim and Edwardian, and swayed like a reed in the wind to nearby bombing. Miss Anstruther understood that this was a good sign, a sign that Mortimer House, unlike the characters ascribed to clients by fortune-tellers, would bend but not break. So she was quite surprised and shocked when, after a series of 3 close-at-hand screams and crashes, the 4th exploded, a giant earthquake against Mortimer House, and sent its whole front crashing down. Miss Anstruther, dazed and bruised from the hurtle of bricks and plaster flung at her head and choked with dust, hurried down the stairs, which were still there. The wall on the street was a pile of smoking, rumbling rubble. The Gothic respectability of Mortimer House won with the little public house across the street. The ground floor flats, the hall and the street outside were scrambled and beaten into a common devastation of smashed masonry and dust. The little caretaker was tugging at his large wife, who was struck unconscious and jammed to the knees in bricks. The basement tenant, who had rushed up with her stirrup pump, began to tug too, and so did Miss Anstruther. Policemen pushed in through the mess, rescue men and a warden followed. All was in train for rescue, as Miss Anstruther had so often seen it in her ambulance driving. "What about the flats above?" they called. "Anyone in them?" Only 2 of the flats above had been occupied, Miss Anstruther's at the back and Miss Cavendish's at the front. The rescuers rushed upstairs to investigate the fate of Miss Cavendish. "Why the devil," inquired the police, "wasn't everyone downstairs?" But the caretaker's wife, who had been downstairs, was unconscious and jammed, while Miss Anstruther, who had been upstairs, was neither. They hauled out the caretaker's wife and carried her to a waiting ambulance. "Everyone out of the building," shouted the police. "Everyone out!" Miss Anstruther asked why. "The police said that there were to be no bloody whys. Everyone out. The bloody gas pipes burst and they're throwing down fire. The whole thing may go up in a bonfire before you can turn around." A bonfire? Miss Anstruther thought. If that's so, I must go up and save some things. She rushed up the stairs while the rescue men were in Miss Cavendish's flat. Inside her own blasted and twisted door, her flat lay waiting for death. God, muttered Miss Anstruther, what shall I save? She caught up a suitcase and furiously piled books into it. Mathematical Magic, some of the 20 volumes of Purchas's Pilgrims, the 8 little volumes of Walpole's Letters, the 6 volumes of Boswell, and then, as the suitcase would not shut, she turned out Boswell and substituted a china cow, a tiny walnut shell behind glass, a box with a mechanical bird that jumped out and sang, and a fountain pen. No use bothering with the big books or the pictures. Slinging the suitcase across her back, she caught up her portable wireless set and her typewriter, loped downstairs, placed her salvage on the piled wreckage at what had been the street door, and started up the stairs again. As she reached the first floor, there was a burst and a hissing, and a rush of flames leapt over Mortimer House as the burst gas caught and sprang to heaven. Another fiery rose bursting into bloom to join that pandemonic red garden of night. 2 rescue men, carrying Miss Cavendish downstairs, met Miss Anstruther and pushed her back. Clear out. Can't get up there again. It'll go up any minute. It was at this moment that Miss Anstruther remembered the things she wanted the most, the things she had forgotten while she gathered up things she wanted less. She cried, Oh, I must go up again. I must get something out. There's time. Not a bloody second, one of them shouted at her and pushed her back. She fought him. Let me go. Oh, let me go. I tell you, I'm going up once more. On the landing above, a wall of flame leapt crackling to the ceiling. Go up, be damned. Want to go through that? They pulled her down with them to the ground floor. She ran out onto the street, shouting for a ladder. Oh, God, where were the fire engines? 100 fires, the water given out in some places, engines helpless. Everywhere buildings burning, museums, churches, hospitals, great shops, houses, blocks of flats, north, south, east, west and centre. Such a raid never was. Miss Anstruther heeded none of it. With hell blazing and crashing around her, all she thought was, I must get my letters. Oh, dear God, my letters. She rushed again into the inferno, but again she was dragged back. No one to go in there, said the police, for all human life was by now extricated. No one to go in, and Miss Anstruther's flat left to be consumed in the spreading of storm of fire, which was to leave no rack behind. Everything was doomed. Furniture, books, pictures, china, clothes, manuscripts, everything. All she thought of was the desk crammed with letters that should have been the first thing she saved. What had she saved instead? Her wireless, her typewriter, a suitcase full of books? Looking around, she saw that all 3 had gone from where she'd put them down. Perhaps they were in the safekeeping of the police, more likely in the wholly unsafe keeping of some rescue squad man or private looter. Miss Anstruther cared little. She sat down on the wreckage of the road, sick and shaking, wholly bereft. The bombers departed, their job well done. Dawn came, dim and ashy. The little burial garden was like a garden in a Vesuvian village, grey in its ash coat. The air choked with fine drifts of cinders. Mortimer House still burned, for no one had put it out. A grimy warden with a notebook asked Miss Anstruther, Have you anywhere to go? No, she said, I shall stay here. Better to go to a rest centre, said the warden, wearily doing his job, not caring where anyone went, wondering what had happened in North Ealing, where he lived. Miss Anstruther stayed, watching the red ruins smouldering low. Sometime, she thought, it will be cool enough to go into. There followed the haunted, desperate days of search, which found nothing. Since silver and furniture had been wholly consumed, what hope for letters? There was no charred sliver of the old locked rosewood desk which had held them. The burning words were burnt, the lines, running small and close and neat down the page, difficult to decipher, with the O's and A's never closed at the top, had run into a flaming void and would never be deciphered any more. Miss Anstruther tried to recall them as she sat in her alien room, shutting her eyes. She tried to see again the phrases that, once you had made them out, lit the page like stars. There had been many hundreds of letters, spread over 22 years. Last year, their writer had died. The letters were all that Miss Anstruther had left of him. She had not yet reread them. She had been waiting till she could do so without the devastation of unendurable weeping. They had lain there, a solace waiting for her when she could take it. Had she taken it, she could have recalled them better now. But as it was, her memory held disjointed phrases, could not piece them together. Light of my eyes, you are the sun and the moon and the stars to me. When I think of you, life becomes music, poetry, beauty, and I am more than myself. It is what lovers have found in all the ages and no one has found before. The sun flickering through the beaches on your hair, and so on. As each phrase came back to her, it jabbed at her heart like a twisting bayonet. He would run over a list of places they'd seen together in the secret, stolen travels of 20 years. The balcony where they dined at the Friar Inn, leaning over the green river, eating trout just caught in it. The little wild strawberries at Andorra la Vieja, the mountain pass that ran down to it from Aix. Lerida, Zaragoza, little mountain towns in the Pyrenees, tramping about France in a hot July. The stream that rushed steeply down the village street at Florac, the frogs croaking in the hills about it, the gorges of the Tarn. Villages in the Haute-Savoie jumbled among mountain rocks over brawling streams, the motor bus over the Alps down into Susa in Italy. Walking over the Amberley Downs, along the Dorset coast from Corfe to Lyme on 2 hot May days, sauntering in Buckinghamshire beechwoods, boating off Buckler's Hard, climbing Dunkery Beacon to Porlock, driving on a June afternoon over Kirkdale Pass. Baedeker starred places because we ought to see them, he wrote. I star them because we saw them together, and those stars light them up forever. Of this kind had been many of the letters that had been for the last year all Miss Anstruther had left, except memory, of 22 years. There had been other letters about books he was reading, books she was writing, others about plans, politics, health, the weather, himself, herself, anything. I could have saved them, she kept thinking. I had the chance, but I saved a typewriter and a wireless set and some books and a walnut shell and a china cow, and even they are gone. So she would cry and cry until tears blunted at last for the time the sharp edge of grief, leaving only a dull lassitude, an end of being. Sometimes she would take out and look at the charred corner of paper, which was now all she had of her lover. All that was legible of it was a line and a half of close small writing, the O's and A's open at the top. It had been written 21 years ago, and it said, "Leave it at that. I know now that you don't care twopence. If you did, you would." The words, each time she looked at them, seemed to darken and obliterate a little more of the 20 years that had followed them, the years of the letters and the starred places and all they had had together. "You don't care twopence," he seemed to say still. "If you had cared twopence, you would have saved my letters, not your wireless and your typewriter and your china cow." Oh, if instead of these words she had found "light in my eyes," or "I think of the balcony at Foix," she thought she could have gone on living. As it is, thought Miss Anstruther, as it is, I can't. So each night she cried herself to sleep and woke to drag through another empty summer's day. Later, she took another flat. Life assembled itself about her again. Kind friends gave her books. She bought another typewriter, another wireless set, and ruined herself with getting necessary furniture, for which she would get no financial help until after the war. She noticed little of all this as she did, and saw no real reason for doing any of it. She was alone, with a past devoured by fire, and a charred scrap of paper which said "you don't care twopence," and then a blank, a great interruption, an end. She had failed in caring once, 20 years ago, and failed again now, and the 20 years between were a drift of grey ashes that once were fire, and she a drifting ghost too. She had to leave it at that. Isn't that the saddest story you've ever heard? I could barely get through it. I mean, only 9 pages long, and the depth of human emotion in that story, I mean, partly why it's so vivid is it was semi-autobiographical. That's basically what happened to Rose Macaulay, the writer. She had a lover, and the flat where she lived was totally destroyed in the Blitz in 1941. She lost everything, her flat, her books, presumably her lover's letters. and hence the vividness with which she conveys the grief. It's quite a lot for a Wednesday morning, isn't it? But anyway, certainly a distraction from whatever is going on in your house right now. I mean, I hope. Anyway, she says, pivoting. Thanks so much for joining us. I know, so sad, as you're all saying. Gosh, so sad. Isn't that just the saddest story you've ever heard? So incredibly vivid. Feelings, so many feelings, you guys. So much sorrow. Really is. Anyway, lots to have, so many of you today. A really sad story, but really a powerful and I hope very memorable one. I'll do another one on Friday. So lovely to have you all along. Hope you enjoyed 11s with Fran along with a cup of tea. And I'll see you Friday. Thanks again.